Are you ready, City Clerk? Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. So hello, everybody. It's nice to see all of your smiling faces without a mask, too. What fun, right? That means you're all vaccinated, because if you're unvaccinated, you're supposed to have your mask on. So we're appreciative of the regulations that are lifting. Or if you just feel like wearing a mask, of course you can, to protect your health and others. So welcome to our special meeting. It's just after 3. And this is a special meeting of the Encinitas City Council, and it's Wednesday, February 16, 2022. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Hinsey?
Here.
Councilmember Kranz?
Here.
Councilmember Lyons?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Mosca?
Here.
And Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council are present.
Okay, thank you. So we have one item today, and that's discussion of permitted land uses for the Pacific View site. So we're going to take a staff report, and then I'm going to take the public comment at the end of this meeting, so before we conclude, but to allow the council members to speak and to allow the public to respond to what you hear us talking about. So I know that's a little bit different. So I wanted to give you that notice in advance. So go ahead, Roy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members, and our community. My name is Roy Sapao. I'm the Director of Development Services. What's before you tonight, or this afternoon, is the land use discussion for the Pacific View site. Before I get into the details, I just want to start off with what exactly we're asking of you tonight, or this afternoon.
Can you please speak louder and more clearly into your microphone so the audience can all hear you?
All right. Check, check. Good. All right. So before I get into the details of the presentation, I want to start off with what is it that we're asking the City Council this afternoon. What we're asking is for the City Council to discuss the potential possible land uses for the Pacific View site and provide direction to staff on the next steps. So the Pacific View site is located in the old Encinitas community. It's also located in the coastal appeal zone. What that means is any coastal development permit that the city issues is appealable to the California Coastal Commission. Any member of the community or the Coastal Commission themselves can appeal a decision made by the city. In addition, the Pacific View site is also located in a downtown Encinitas specific plan, specifically in the public, semi-public zone. I want to provide a brief background of how we got to where we are today. In 2003, the Pacific View Elementary School discontinued operation. In 2014, after negotiations with the school district and the city proceeded to purchase the property in 2014. Following the purchase, the city of Encinitas entered into an agreement with the Encinitas Arts, Culture, and Ecology Alliance organization to enter into an agreement to operate and maintain the site at the Pacific View location. As part of that agreement, the EACEA organization submitted an application to the Planning Department in June of 2017 to redevelop the Pacific View site into an art, culture, and ecology facility. That application was considered by the Planning Commission in February of 2019. The Planning Commission received multiple public testimonies, the staff reports, which included staff's recommendation, and ultimately decided to continue the application and requested several things of EACEA. Some of which, some additional information related to their operation, particularly related to the farmers market. There were some concerns about their special events some of which were large in scale, up to 300 attendees. So the Planning Commission has some concerns about that. There were also some concerns about parking. That was another issue that the Planning Commission identified and requested that the EACEA do some additional analysis. And that item was continued off calendar. So that item never came back to the Planning Commission. As you're aware, the agreement with EACEA expired, which is why that application never returned to Planning Commission. However, it's important to note that that application is still valid. That as part of the discussion with the EACEA and the city, that application has been transferred over to the city to manage and decide on whether or not to move forward with that application. So that application is still valid. In December of 2021, the City Council received an assessment report prepared by Jeff Katz, who's here with us tonight. That assessment report, it looked at the existing conditions of the site as well as potential improvements with associated cost. So we're not going to get into that, the details of that assessment report, but we do have the assessment report available if the City Council wish to or have any questions regarding that, as well as Jeff Katz is here to answer questions. At that City Council meeting in December, the Council received the report and provided direction to staff to proceed with the options that were identified during your discussion. The Council also directed staff to return with an item to discuss land use, potential land use for this site, which is why we're here tonight, or today. So with that, I would like to get into the land use. As I mentioned earlier, this site is located in the public, semi-public zone in the downtown Encinitas specific plan. The matrix that's on the screen here is some of the most common arts and culture uses that we had identified in the land use matrix in our municipal code. Even though this property is located in the downtown Encinitas specific plan, the specific plan refers land use requirements to our general municipal code, which is Chapter 30.04 of the municipal code. You'll notice some of the land uses are in red and some are in green. The distinction is the land uses that are in red are uses that were proposed or included as part of the EACEA application. So what you'll see is the land uses on the left-hand side. So for instance, the museum, and on the right-hand side is the permitting requirement in the public, semi-public zone. So for instance, the museum is permitted by right in the public, semi-public zone. And then you'll notice down where community garden and farmer's market, that requires an agricultural permit. And then all other uses following the farmer's market would require some type of a use permit. And it's also important to note that the art gallery and pottery sales, those uses are prohibited in the public, semi-public zone. It's also important to highlight that while some of these uses, for instance, the art gallery and pottery sale may be prohibited, the municipal code allows or gives the Planning Commission the authority to render a determination on some of these uses that could be accessory uses to a primary use. So for instance, a good example would be for a museum or a theater, place of public assembly, or an auditorium. Sale of art can be an accessory use to that, or a display of art could be considered an accessory use to that primary use. So I just wanted to highlight that. And also, and that applies to any other uses, that the Planning Commission has that authority to determine whether a specific use can be considered an accessory use to the primary overall use. So,
Would we have to build a pool before we could have a swam meet?
apologies. That is meant to say swap meet.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So thank you for that. But yes, a swap meet requires a minor use permit in the public, semi-public zone. So as part of your discussion today is, well, we're suggesting as you deliberate and discuss the different land uses, I want to highlight these three things for you to consider as you're deliberating. One is if the goal is to identify a land use and to activate, or the quickest path to getting a use going at this site, what we're recommending is the most streamlined process is to focus on the land uses that are permitted by right. That will not require a discretionary permit. It's also important to note, and for your consideration, that site improvements will be required for any use to occupy or use the site. So it's important to note that, because the improvements may trigger, or most likely will trigger, a coastal development permit and other entitlement permits. So it's not just a land use trigger, it's also structural improvements that could trigger an entitlement permit. And then last but not least, as part of your deliberation, we ask that you also considered the operation and the maintenance obligation and cost associated with the different land uses, as well as the associated improvements that would be necessary in order to, for the land use, whatever land use you decide on, to occupy the site. So with that, we are seeking your guidance and direction on the next steps based on your discussion tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Could you go back one screen so we keep that up for us? So thank you for the presentation. I think I'd just like to say a few words here at the beginning. We heard the last report about Pacific View in December, so now it's been 2 months. And I think we have a real opportunity with this city council to make some decisions about Pacific View that will allow us to actually move forward with a plan. And as we know, it's been 7 years since we purchased this property, and it is currently not operating for the public, despite the fact that there has been a lot of really good effort from community members and the EACEA members to get it activated and to make sure that there's not vandalism and that it's cleaned up and that things are planted. And I want to recognize all the great work that's been done by our community volunteers to try to make the site something that we could use. But the reality is right now it is looking a bit derelict and it's not available for the public, and it has a lot of potential. So we know that there are these financial costs associated with doing anything with any city property, or investing in creating a new park, or creating a roundabout, or creating a better downtown environment, streetscape environment. And so we know that this cost is a hurdle, but I think that what I do know from my experience in this position is that if you don't know where you're going to, you're definitely not going to get there. So there are all of these hurdles and a path, but at the end, we have to decide on what we want at the end, or we end up in what I perceive to be a circular series of conversations, which I also frequently describe as analysis paralysis, where we say, well, we could do that thing, or we could do this other thing, or if we did that, then we could do this, and then we end up essentially continuing to talk, but not actually getting on a path to the end. So my hope with this meeting today is that the 5 of us would be able to come up with a consensus view of the end, and that would help us then to give direction to the staff on the path. And so my hope for this meeting is that we will hear from the public, but after you're able to hear from us about all of the questions and all of our thoughts, and with the idea that that the majority of us, hopefully all of us together, I know I certainly want to work together and come up with something that we all like. I think that there is a way for us to find those overlapping goals that will achieve an arts center, which I think is what we bought this property for, and we have wanted it to be from the beginning. So I'm just going to propose something and then ask my council colleagues to respond to that, and just know that I'm happy to have it not go this direction as a possibility, but I think as a conversation starter, I want to just be able to lay something out there and then have you respond to it. And I also just would like to suggest that you should speak as long as you want to about the things that are important to you about Pacific View. Because I know we've all spoken publicly extensively about Pacific View as part of our campaigns for office, as part of sitting up here, as part of hearing multiple reports, as part of being on subcommittees, meeting with members of the community about a whole bunch of different ideas. And so, I want to make sure that everyone feels that they have enough time to be able to communicate those things to your colleagues up here and also to the public. Because sometimes we're in a real rush with meetings and trying to get through stuff, but I see this more as that workshop opportunity where we, of course, are making the decisions in public, but we're able to air the things that are important to us too. So I would like to suggest that we do consider having the end goal, and I think if you think about what is the end goal for this site, that we settle on it being an art center, and we focus on it being uses that promote that. So my hope is that we would be going in a pretty straight path toward it being an art center. So as part of our budget process, we would be talking about that, and that this would be a priority for us. So I think what that means if we're saying it's an art center is it's not probably going to have like an extensive exercise component like gyms and pools and housing and huge special events and even excellent suggestions we've had from other community groups like around our organics or recycling programs. I know the Solana Center does great work, and Jessica's here, and I'm sure we'll hear from her later, but that probably is not mission aligned with an art center. So saying that our end use is art center, and then from my perspective, we're much more likely to get to the end if we say that we don't want to go to a vote of the people to change the zoning. So saying that we want at this point to say we're going to focus on creating Pacific View within the zoning that currently exists. And so Roy had put up all of those uses, but I think museum and even gallery as ancillary to museum. I mean, one of the main differences with a gallery is that you can sell things, and with a museum, I think you don't. So part of that is something the Planning Commission would have to work out. But basically, museum, theater, place of public assembly, art education, all those things are in the area of arts. So to me, it seems like there's quite a lot of possibility within what is already allowed under the zoning. But basically, to make the decision that we're not going to go to a vote of the people, so we're going to work within that. And then I would suggest, and I am quite eager to hear my colleagues' suggestion on this, but that we don't try to find another community partner at this early stage. So I think one of the issues, EACEA did great work, and they worked so hard at it, and they had a lot of turnover and board leadership change, and in the end, we did end up with a lot of expertise. But the reality is that there's always going to be this liability indemnification issue of the reality that we live in a litigious society, that this is in the middle of a neighborhood, potentially has a lot of litigation risk, and ultimately a nonprofit or community partner is not going to want to take on that risk. And so that issue of the city being indemnified, I think, is something that is difficult with a community partner. And I think with our previous community partner, there was a lot of opportunity for that to work out, but in the end, it didn't. And so I would suggest that we as a city just own this, just like we would with a park or with our senior and community center, but that we're not thinking of it in broad terms of like the senior and community center having all sorts of things at it, that we are trying to narrow the focus to it being the arts center, because that is what the mission was when we decided to buy it. So I think so to me, what that means when I say that is that at this next stage, we would be deciding that we're not going to go out for an RFP to find another partner. And so I think we did do that at the beginning of this process, and we had two responses. One was an out-of-town area from the Los Angeles area that responded to our RFP request for proposals, and the other was EACEA. And we chose our local one, and we had a really kumbaya kind of meeting where we all joined arms and said, we're going to be able to make this happen. And over many years, it hasn't happened, and so here we are. So I would suggest that we proceed as the prime mover here, the main actor, and that as we go forward, if we get the buildings, we put money in, we get the buildings rehabbed, and we decide we want a partner to operate it, like in the same way, I mean, this is very minor, but at Moonlight Beach, we don't operate our own concessionaire stand, right? We go out for a contract and someone else operates that. So, but we do operate, you know, the maintenance or not maintenance, but the oversight of our senior center. So that is our city staff is in there. So we would decide at kind of at that time if we wanted to have a particular either for-profit or not-for-profit company, probably not-for-profit, be the operator. But I think that that's, you know, another decision point that at our last meeting I think wasn't clear there wasn't a consensus among the council that we felt comfortable just owning the project as a city. So I think if we look like down this for consideration, which I hadn't seen before this meeting tonight, but I think this is a really great way to summarize it, that, you know, the first one is to say that the process, if we focus on that use by right, that means we're not going to a Prop A vote. The second one is the site improvements related to entitlement permits, and I think that's something that I hope, Roy, you could answer a few questions about. I mean, I guess the basic question is, do you foresee that there are any uses that would not require entitlement permits?
So all the uses that were listed as permitted by right, that it will not require a discretionary permit. However, improvements for the site to occupy this, or for the use to occupy the site, that may trigger an entitlement, but the use itself will not trigger an entitlement permit.
And so I guess what I'm getting at is that I understand the distinction you're making, but I go back to the decision when we were making a decision about building a protected bike lane on Highway 101, having to go to the Coastal Commission or being subject to the Coastal Commission was something we were trying to avoid because it allowed us to do a quick build project that was tactical urbanism and change things within the existing footprint. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you see the extent of site improvements? Do you see any scenario where we actually don't get into a Coastal Commission approval process, or is that not on the table because it's so run down?
There's a possibility that we may be exempt from a coastal development permit. The distinction between this site and the Cardiff bike track, Cardiff, that location is in Coastal Commission's permitting jurisdiction, that they have authority to issue permit. In this case, the site is within our permitting jurisdiction. It's just that our final decision is appealable to Coastal Commission. So there's a possibility that some improvements may be exempt from a coastal development permit.
Okay, so I guess as we're having this conversation and then we end up hopefully to be able to give direction to staff, if you could be able to weigh in where appropriate and relevant to say, hey, if you do it a little bit that other way, then you can avoid this timely, expensive permit that's uncertain, or you could do it this way, you know, so just to guide us in that as we're talking about it. Yeah, and then this third bullet, just to go back to the recommendations from staff, consider operation and maintenance obligations. I do think those are things that are really critical, and I also think that they're things that we need to talk about in the budget process when they're compared against the other priorities. But I guess I'll just say at the outset that I do see Pacific View as something that is that unrealized potential that's very possible for us. So there are a lot of different revenue streams that are potentially in play because of just the changing realities of the federal infrastructure bill, our cannabis tax, which will be upcoming, the CARES Act funding. You know, at the moment, we don't have money budgeted for Pacific View, but I think in the comparison of priorities for the city, from at least my one perspective, this is at the very top of something that's accomplishable within our control, and possibly we can afford it. We don't know that quite yet, but I think that'll come to us at the budget. So with all that being said, I'm eager to hear from my colleagues here, and just to as the reminder that the biggest thing is that end goal. And I think the only way that I described the end goal was the things that are already permitted by right. So to say that we would have, I mean, we have potentially 8 classrooms on these 2 buildings that kind of go in this L. And that we would be doing these things that are museum, theater, place of public assembly, art education, and that we would program into that and say, and offer that to the community, and we would have a community-facing property that would be aimed at the arts and and that would be the end use. And I guess the other thing I just want to be clear that I feel like I am saying is that I've always liked to maintain our history, and I think that the mid-century modern schools, especially west of the 101, are really rare. There are very few of those schools that are not only west of the 5, but west of the 101. And so I know now the buildings, people perceive them as rundown and of no value. But I actually think that architecture is classic and iconic, and over time will become even more that way, just like things that are 100 years old seem that way to us now. So I do like the idea of preserving that and not scraping the whole site and building a multi-story art cultural center, which is, a kind of a shiny new toy that seemed really exciting at the time when we at first had this property as a possibility. But my preference would be that we just reinvest in the buildings and the site plan as it is, and we leave some of these things about, like, is the bathroom connected and renovated or is it separate? We basically leave that to staff to recommend the best path, because to me those are things that maybe don't necessarily need council direction, and I'm happy to just have that be proposed as where the bathroom is located. But I do think, of course, it needs to be a functioning bathroom. So with that, I would like to call on my colleagues to offer their thoughts, and I will start with the first one in line, who's right next to me, Deputy Mayor Mosca.
All right. Well, I first want to start off and say hello to everybody and thank you for coming. Thank you to the veterans for showing up today. There's a lot of you. Thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for being here today. And thank you to a lot of the residents that have been around this project and have been working on this project for some time. I see a lot of folks that have been putting paint on the building and volunteering long hours on this building. So thank you for everything you've done. It's absolutely going to help us in the long run because it helps us understand where the building's at now and where we can go in the future. And so just want to give a few comments. Kind of overarching comments. I think for me, it's terribly difficult, the direction to kind of separate the financing from the vision, because I think that we get into problems when we separate that, because I could sit up here and say that I would like, and the community would like, to have many things happen at this site, but obviously, it's financially, it's always a concern, and what we can actually do with it financially is something that's important. But I understand the instructions, so we're not going to basically talk about so much the money today, but what I think we should be doing with the site. So I'm just going to talk about some overarching things. One is it has to be activated, right? That's an important thing. It's just sitting there, and when it's sitting there, it becomes home for folks that are unhoused and skateboarders and graffiti and stuff like that. And so we don't want to see that happen, especially since it's an important site, as been said. It's got to be relevant to the residents. And now I've served in the Parks and Rec Commission previously, and we've done lots of studies and lots of conversations with the residents about what they see as relevant and what would be useful for them. And so I think that we should make sure that the use is relevant, it's embraced by our community, it's seen as something that they need, and that would improve the quality of life here in Encinitas. I think we should have a near-term plan and a long-term plan for this site. And I think that we should be talking about the financial sustainability of the site, and that goes to item number 3. I'm not talking about just the pathway to actually improving the site from what it sits as now, but the O&M, the operations and maintenance of that site into the future. I think that could be, obviously a big budget item, a big increase. And so I do think that the comment about arts partner, I'm willing to kind of defer that for now, but I do think that that's a conversation that we should be having, because it goes directly to O&M and how that site is sustained into the future. So it's something we need to talk about, and maybe perhaps what we need to do is drive this project right now and get it to a point where we can have that conversation about what a partner would look like in the future. And it could be any number of different partnerships, but I think that's important. I do think that a large part of our community really sees this as a cultural arts center, and I embrace that idea of a cultural arts center. I think that there should still be some sort of ecology focus or component to it, And I think this is where, Roy, I would say the near term and the long term can come in, where potentially what we're doing is focusing on, because I think it's much more feasible, the Cultural Arts Center. And then in the long term, how do we weave in that ecology component so that's not lost? But it doesn't necessarily need to be the thrust, the focus in the beginning. But I do think that in the long term, it would be nice to kind of weave in the ecology portion. But I'm fine with it being an art center right now. I think in terms of your questions, the streamlining, of course, I think that whatever, again, activating the site, it's a big priority for me. So if whatever we can do to get it in the near term activated, and that would mean to basically look toward the uses that are permitted, not toward the uses that are not permitted. However, in the long term, I think we should do some thinking about those uses that may be important to us, and that actually may feed into what's in the what's relevant to our residents, and what may actually help us build an even more special cultural arts center and ecology component to it as well. The site improvements, anything that we can actually get done as soon as possible. The mayor talked about different funding sources for that. Whatever we're able to kind of bring to bear on that. We obviously have a lot of responsibilities and obligations for the improvements of our roads, and so I think that if funding is being taken away from any of the road projects that are already in the queue, I think we need to talk about that. But if there are other funding sources, such as already been mentioned, that are not already obligated, then I think that should go to this project. In terms of the look of the building, I'm a big believer in adaptive reuse projects, and so if we could absolutely maintain the Art Deco mid-century look of it, and just have an adaptive reuse, that would be awesome. And I think that's it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. I want to echo my council members and the mayor's sentiments, thanking the community for their continued involvement and interest in moving the Pacific View property forward. Not only that, but I think everyone in this room has skin in this game. You live near it. You volunteered. You went to school there. This is such a loved community asset. So I am anxious to move forward in a clear, straightforward direction, and I'm thrilled to be at the point right now where we can make some clear definition of our strategies moving forward. As far as the value of this property specifically, I do want to add something that I think everyone tells me, and I think probably most people in this room believe too, is that the Pacific View property itself is part of the character of our community. And it's been neglected, unfortunately, but it can come back. I do a lot of work with historic preservation, and there's some good bones there. And it's part of the fabric of our community. And so wherever we have an opportunity to preserve historic properties, I'll be right there advocating for that. And this is one of those that's quite high profile. So I just wanted to make sure I went on the record of saying that. So I mentioned a minute ago that I'm anxious to move forward on this. 2 years ago when we met, and this is before I sat on this council, but I was involved at that time from being in the position of being in the audience. And 2 years ago when we met with the EACEA board and had a joint meeting, a public meeting, I thought that was a hugely important milestone where I know that EACEA was concerned about some indemnification challenges moving forward and needed some clarity, and the city said, we're going to step up. And at that point, it was like, well, we're going to do it. We're going to step up. And I think it's been it's kind of been a longer road from that point to this point here than I would have hoped. But things happen. We learn a lot. We've covered a lot of ground over the years that we've been evaluating the property and looking at what our options are. We have learned a lot. And I honestly feel like I have learned a lot too, from you, from the experts, from the expertise. And where I'm at with this right now is that I'm thrilled the city's taking the lead. I do want us to take the lead. I do believe we should talk more about partners because there's different kinds of partners. Partners will come into the mix with funding, I think. But partners are also really valuable as we move forward because our art communities, our artists, our art partners here in the community who will be using the property are valuable for their insights into what's the best way to adapt this property for the best uses. So I see that our artists and arts community partners are valuable up front to inform and help us figure out what's best. But perhaps, and I don't know the answer to this, maybe it's someone with a legal background, but perhaps there's a way for partners to be involved in this upfront process where they don't feel as though they've got some legal exposure that's too much to bear. So I think that's the benefit to having the city in the lead now. We're saying, yep, we're going to move this forward. I also see partners valuable on the operating side of it, and I agree with my colleagues on that. And so we have ways of trying to figure out how can we get partners on the operations and maintenance side, and also how can we bring partners to the table? First of all, do we want to? And then how can we bring partners to the table to help fund the adaptation of the building and the project overall? So I think partners are still going to play a key role in how we move forward. I was at that Kumbaya meeting that Mayor Blakespear referenced earlier, and so it's very memorable for whoever was there. And at the time, the proposal was for arts, ecology, culture and ecology. And so that's why we went down that road through the EACEA. However, I think we should focus now because I think one thing we've learned going down the road of looking at the breadth of things that the community wants to happen on this property, perhaps that's too much for this property. Perhaps we should streamline and really look at what we can achieve. I'm really an advocate for that near-term goal. I think that's our most important goal. I think it needs to be clear. Think it needs to be doable within the by right and within what we can handle in a permit manner. That doesn't mean no permits, but it means, what kind of uses are the most important on this property, what improvements need to be made to the property to make that happen, and then let's figure out kind of iteratively how the best way to move forward with that is. We might need to make some compromises along the way. We might need to manage expectations. If there's something we really want there, but for some reason it's too much of a barrier, we need to have that hard conversation because if it's going to be a barrier to us moving forward with the near-term goal, then we might need to just set it aside and move forward with what we can move forward with. So that concludes my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So I too have a personal history with Pacific View, and I was lucky enough to attend school there, and my mom taught kindergarten there for many years. And so when I go back onto that campus, I have all these memories like, well, that's where I lost my tooth. And that's where the basketball team found out that I had a crush on a 6th grader when I was in kindergarten. And so I do think that there is a value to keeping Pacific View much like it is now. And I love the architecture, and I love being able to go back into those classrooms with Danny Salzhandler and work on the Arts Alive banner program and just revel in going back in a moment of time, which is so rare around places that change frequently. So I like the direction that I hear my colleagues advocating for. I think that we have only a certain time horizon as a council. You realize as much as you want to dream big and vision and see this blank slate for what it could be in 30 or 45 years, there's really only a couple of years where we have this council intact, where we have this institutional memory intact, where we have folks like Tony, who advocated to buy it in the first place, and Joy, who's devoted so much of her own personal time to envisioning how it could look. So I think that we do need to act now. I think that we need to accomplish what we can with the current zoning, because we went with the kitchen sink approach for a long time and tried to put a lot of things in there that maybe weren't so compatible or were a little bit mind-boggling of figuring out how all those things could work together. So I am in favor of focusing the site on art. I'm in favor of setting aside some of the ecology uses that we had earlier considered. I mean, art is a universe in and of itself, and I think there's so much that will be able to fit in this site with the uses that are by right. I mean, even the word culture, I appreciate that. There's a lot that can go into it, but really focusing on the arts is what I think our city has been hoping for so long. So it's encouraging to hear that the EACEA application that so many of you put your time into is still active. And I think that the parts of that we can keep with us on the critical path to reopening as soon as we can, we should stick with those things. And then the things that maybe present more complexity that might take us off that path or open us up to more legal challenge or frustration with the Coastal Commission, we should set those aside. I think that we have the position right now where we can set some realistic expectations and start working towards them. And just having served now for 3 years and understanding the way that budgets work, we're looking at some big numbers, some millions of numbers. And I think in reality, we're going to probably be looking at a year of design and permitting, and then a year of construction, and then a year of maintenance and operation costs and dialing those in. And so I think we should have the money, and the city should be the bus driver, and we should be driving this bus forward. But there is a reality to staggering some of that for our upcoming budget season, that we're not going to use all of it in that first year. So on the question of partnerships, I understand that we hope that money would rain down on us and we would have a surprise donor come forward and give us all of this money to be able to activate, but that hasn't been the reality. So I think we should do what we can as the city to set aside a couple $1 million to activate the site, get it open, and then start talking about partners when we've got the blank slate, because I don't think it's a blank slate right now. I think it's a little bit of a money pit. So let's get it to the point where it's a blank slate, and then we can start really bringing in the partners who have been alongside us this whole time and turning it into something that makes us all proud.
Thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad we're here having this fairly difficult conversation because of all the hurdles and obstacles that are before us, but I think it's pretty important that we advance this project. And looking at the timeline that was on the slide presentation was pretty amazing because of what it left out. There were a lot of steps along the way that were very challenging, and to get to the point where the city purchased the property was no small feat. And it was, I think, a really important decision by the council in 2014. The site itself, one of the things that drove me to acquire the site was the historic impacts, the history that is at that site. Mr. Pitcher donated the land in the 1880s, 1883, I think to be exact, and it was for the purpose of educating the children of our community. The one-room schoolhouse sat on that site for many, many years, and thanks to the good work of the Encinitas Historical Society, Carolyn Cope and her crew, it has been preserved and still is a fount of historic information about our community. So it's really special to have that as part of the site. I did have the opportunity to serve on that board and was very impressed with the effort that had gone into that part of our city's history. So, when the school district declared it surplus, it was really, I think important that we get to the point where that land continued to be public land and be a site for members of the community to gather. And so the goal of creating a placemaking has been what we've been trying to accomplish here for the last 7 years. It didn't help that we had a pandemic in the middle of that. But like my colleagues, I would like to acknowledge the effort that went into advancing this application to get in front of the Planning Commission. It was a significant amount of money that went into that, a lot of sweat equity, including valuable reports that were done by professional organizations at no cost to the EACEA. So I think the number roughly is about $250,000 in reports that are part of the application. And it is important to me to be able to pick up that application and make the modifications that are necessary to advance that. But with that, I'd like to ask Roy to speak to the issue of CEQA piecemealing. Is there a way that we can establish some outdoor activities that would be allowed and operate those activities, hold those activities at the site without doing the improvements to the building, without running into problems with piecemealing?
I'm sure I'll make an attempt to address the question, Councilmember Krantz, but at some point I'll probably defer to our legal counsel as well. There's a possibility, there's a way to do it. You have to make sure that you're not deferring any impacts. You have to analyze impacts of a use on a site or improvements and not come across as deferment of those analysis at a later date. So any use that you decide to move forward with, whether it's interim or just initially, those uses have to be a standalone use, meaning that we fully analyze the use within its own merits and identify what their impacts are to the environment. The concern then becomes, okay, are there other uses that are related to those uses that we're now deferring at a later date? Then that's where someone could argue that you now also have to analyze those future uses as part of this initial assessment. And that's where the CEQA piecemealing could come in. So, but I'll defer to if there's anything need to be added to that.
Thank you, Roy. I thought that was a really good explanation, and kind of another way to say it for members of maybe the public too is kind of like when you're looking at a full contract and you're figuring out that the law requires you to do something based on the total amount of the contract, and then when you parse it up, is it a real true parse up of individual costs, or is it really a full cost that is looking like something else? So CEQA acts that same way when it says, are you contemplating all the uses that you're going to do, or are they in fact separate and allow you to? Now this becomes the subject and can become the subject of litigation, as you can imagine. But what Roy said is, yes, it absolutely is possible.
So the hypothetical that I would throw at you to see if it's at all possible is that I know that there's been some discussion about hosting a farmer's market on Pacific View site, which would not involve any of the buildings being used. And would we have to have approved the entire packet of the application, or is that something that the farmer's market could be issued a ag permit for farmer's market and not need the full analysis of other things that are going to happen on that site?
So it depends. Depends on the timing of if the farmer's market is, say tonight you decide you want to move forward with the farmer's market as part of the initial plan, then we would have to analyze that as part of all the other uses. We have to do a comprehensive review. If you decide tonight to defer it at a later date, that can happen. We would just have to analyze the farmer's market at that time and determine whether or not the addition of the farmer's market to the site would trigger any new impacts that were not analyzed initially as part of the initial assessment. That's.
So I have the Planning Commission staff report that was heard on February 21st of 2019. So we're almost 3-year anniversary date coming up for the application. And what we have up here are the minutes from that meeting. And as you can see, that they continued the meeting to a date certain, actually, of April 4 of 2019, and then they identified issues that they wanted to have analyzed and brought back. And so my question would be, can we take this application that had been submitted and I don't know whether we do it publicly in another workshop format or what, but address these issues and scale back any ecologically related issues that maybe are not, the council's not inclined to pursue at this time. But could we do those things, address that, and get it back to the Planning Commission when that process is complete?
Yes, that is possible. It depends on the direction we receive today.
Okay.
Depending on what land uses are critical to the council to proceed with. And then based on that direction, we will go back and refine the application based on our understanding of what is the most streamlined process based on that direction.
Okay. And to the organizations that are interested in being our partner, I really appreciate you stepping forward and doing that and being willing to do that. I think one of the things that I've learned in this process is that nonprofit organizations, we've had some really good ones. The groups that have presented their proposals are all very good, but part of the challenge that we see is the continuity of the organization is super critical. So how to avoid getting into a situation where we find that the partner that we've picked is running the risk of not being able to continue the partnership, and so for me that meant that maybe the right approach is for the city to have some significant role in the operations of the site. But I do think that all of our nonprofits, I have been studying a movement known as the Nonprofit Center, and I could see Pacific View being a very successful nonprofit center just because of the number of nonprofits that we have in our community. All you have to do is look at the tables that we have from the Mizell grant program that are currently known as the ECI and Encinitas grants. There are a whole bunch of really strong organizations that are participants in that program, and I think all of them would be excellent to have access to. It would be excellent for them to have access to the Pacific View Arts Center, or whatever it will end up being called. So my goal is to work towards establishing that nonprofit center, maybe come up with a group of leaders of those nonprofits that might be permanent members of a council that would decide and serve as the operating partner, and then have some rotating nonprofit presidents that would also serve on that board. But it's a way that we can instead of picking a winner, we can embrace every nonprofit that is endeavoring to create art and maybe even some cultural endeavors as well. So that's my interest, and I hope that we can come to a consensus here tonight and decide on a way to move forward. And when the time is right, I'd be happy to make a motion on that.
Okay, Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to follow up on Councilmember Cran's comments and maybe just get clarification from him and Roy also. So I think what I'm hearing is there's an opportunity to move forward with documents, the application as it currently stands. It's already gone through staff. It's already gone through the Planning Commission. There were comments from the Planning Commission. Some of them were some questions associated with parking, a lighting plan, noise, I think, was something. There was a list of concerns. So what we could do is take that and then look at it through, kind of hone the application a little bit to streamline it through the lens of cultural arts, which would help to streamline and focus the uses, and also then what kinds of improvements would be needed. And then we could kind of, I would say, edit that application and move it forward from where it is to getting planning commission review and approval, and then towards any other permitting needed. Am I understanding that right? Did I characterize it right?
For the most part, yes, you can. But to get to that point, as part of the number 2 or on the screen, when EACEA submitted their application, the assessment report that was done was not completed, that identified improvements to the site. So that piece was not considered when EACEA submitted their application. So that's another key component that we would have to analyze to determine whether or not how to bring forward an application. But in terms of land uses, if the goal is to focus on the permitted uses, then we have to work to figure out what is the programming, because the footprint of what EACEA submitted may not work to align with the goal of doing a streamlined process.
I see that.
So
Yeah.
we have to, so again, based on your direction tonight, if your direction is Art Center, focus on the permitted uses, then we will go back and yes, we will definitely use EACEA's application as a starting point, but we will start trimming off the things that that does not align with the objective. That includes uses that are not permitted, uses that are required, that require some sort of an entitlement, and minimize the potential exposure in terms of, we still haven't talked about parking. Parking is a critical issue. While the use may be permitted, we're looking at the constraints of the site and whether or not, will a museum fit in one of the classrooms? And do we have adequate parking on site to accommodate the museum? So there's more into that analysis, and it's not just picking up where EACEA left off, because EAC had a different sort of programming. So that's something, we'll have to look into it, but our goal tonight is to get direction from the council. And the direction where I'm hearing the council going, I think it's a clear direction, is to focus on an art center, and then focus on the permitted uses. And then my recommendation will be for us to take that direction and analyze the application, and then we'll refine it based on that direction.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think, to me, it seems like the question of the EACEA permit being of value to us or not, if we're taking this on and owning it as our project that we're moving forward in a streamlined way, if the EACEA permit process is not helpful to us to forward that we would just not do that. But if you did find it to be valuable, I mean, I don't know how different the process would be because we're now the actor instead of an outside nonprofit. But I mean, one of the key things you said that I just heard you say was that there was no assessment report done of the actual site. So that is a key thing. I mean, we had the whole architectural analysis, which has, multiple proposed layouts, and that's key to doing the uses. So it seems like that's a major thing that still needs to be accomplished, which we've done some of that work on. So in some ways, you'd be marrying these two of site improvements plus uses. And so I guess one of my questions, Roy, to you is, if we were to give direction like this tonight, do you feel like the uses have been defined enough for you, just in terms of them being within the matrix? And because I guess in some ways, I mean, I just wanted to add my additional thought that I would like the project to be public facing and to be able to provide as much opportunity for the public to use it as is reasonable, given that it's buried in the middle of a neighborhood and it doesn't have great parking. But so the idea of us having like 8 classrooms, and if they were all rented in a long-term way to one person that had no public-facing art experience for people, I don't feel that would meet the goal. So like, if it was just a way to like rent a cheaper place for someone to do their own art privately, like that 8 people doing art privately would not meet my goal of it being more public-facing. So I think the question of like, what are the ultimate uses, like what actually is happening in those classrooms, would be something that would be worked out by the Arts Commission and the Friends of the Arts and all the different organizations that do arts in this community, who would be able to make suggestions and proposals, and that those, like, in a way, it's the uses in a much more micro way would be a future thing, but we could still renovate the property to be flexible for those kinds of things. Does that seem like that works for staff in terms of being able to put forward a path without having it clear that someone wants to do ballet versus doing clay or something, you know?
I guess what would be helpful is if there are specific uses that may not be listed on this, that may not be on the list. Like for instance, a good objective is the public facing. So that's clear direction that any use that comes forward has to have that public facing component. But if there are other uses that the city council would like to include or believe that it's under the umbrella of an art center that's not included on the list, it would be helpful to provide that. So as we analyze potential uses for the site and potential impacts, we'll ensure that we include those as part of the conversation.
Okay, and I also just want to refer to our assistant city manager, Jennifer, has been part of this discussion for many years. She would sit in on the EACEA board meeting. She's a former parks director that oversees the arts department and the arts commission. And you know, we've done a public survey. We have had a lot of touch points around uses over time. So it seems to me like we're going to hear from the public in just a little short minute, but it seems to me like we probably would be able to put together the things that we foresee as being of most value in our community to serve our arts community here in Encinitas, based on all of that background. Do you want to comment, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. We've done a couple presentations at the Arts Commission. They are obviously very interested in this site. We have our nonprofit partner, which is Encinitas Friends of the Arts, which was actually formed to be the nonprofit for arts here in Encinitas. We did do a public survey, I want to say in the fall of 2020. As well. So we have received a lot of input, as well as we've had many letters from folks. So I think what Roy's talking about too, a lot of the constraints do with the building and how it's laid out. So I think what we'd have to do is make sure that the uses that we've heard from the community that they would like to see do run with the building. You know, one of the things that came up in the survey that was big is a performance space. And unfortunately, Pacific View doesn't have very large performance spaces. If you think of the community center where we've done State of the City and several things, you can have about 300 people. There's nowhere to put 300 people inside the facility at Pacific View. So I think that there's a way to marry what the public would like to see and what's important to council and the public as far as arts and culture, and also marrying it with what we can do in the building. So I think that there's a way to meld that together and come up with a plan.
Okay, thank you. And there have been things that have been there that to me seem like they're very mission aligned, like the Arts Alive banner event where people were looking at all the banners and hello, Danny, it's nice to see you out there. You know, that's a very specific type of art that was in some ways narrow, but it draws people every year. And so that was, I don't think there were probably 300 people at one time, but over time that number probably trickled in for that kind of event. And then I think there was some type of a maker space market too, where there were little booths and people could get things. And maybe, I mean, yeah, so anyway, those seem to be like the type of smaller scale. We're not going to have a State of the City there with 300 people, and also that's not mission aligned, but that we would be able to have some of these art things. I just want to mention also when we're talking about farmers markets and, you know, that we've had some uses on that property, like nobody refers to this anymore, but I remember this really vividly, that we had a really hard time getting a tow company off of that site. So they had been, a tow company was operating there, and they would bring vehicles at night, and, you know, we bought it as an art center, and we gave notice, and they didn't leave, and we spent a lot of time trying to find an alternate space for the tow company, and, you know, it is very difficult to cease uses even when they're completely incompatible with the site. And so, you know, I am wary of starting a use that might be really difficult to transition, especially if we're getting on the path now of actually doing this art center. So the other thing that happened there was Surfing Madonna storage. There was all sorts of stuff that was stored there for, you know, one of these major events in our city, which I think was also, we had problems getting the key and we couldn't get in, and it was our property, but we couldn't maintain it. And I guess, you know, all those kind of, you live and learn about it. And so now it's completely fenced off and closed and not available in really any way. So Anyway, this is just all the history and context of the property. But I think we should definitely go to the public speakers and have your thoughts and responses to the things you've heard tonight. And thank you in advance for caring so much about Pacific View.
Okay, the first three speakers, Naima Woodward, Brent Ringut, followed by Naomi Nussbaum.
Encinitas and president of Encinitas Friends of the Arts, a nonprofit art organization formed to advocate and fundraise for city-owned art centers such as Pacific View. I wish to thank you for offering this time and place for us to present this vision plan, and my immense gratitude goes to the community members and organizations who have written letters of support. Now I'd like to go over some points reflecting facts and our current knowledge of where things are with regards to the Pacific View and the role of the city. Before I go further, after hearing you, I think we are there, and I'm ecstatic, actually. So a lot of these are going to be moot points, so please bear with me. I'm just going to focus on some of the things that make sense. And for the audience, I just want to make sure we have that vision plan available. It's public. Please take a look at it. When we were putting this together, it was our understanding that there were no contractual or legal relationship between the city and EACEA or any other organization for this site. EFA and arts commissioners continue with their efforts to be engaged in this conversation, offering more transparency, and wish to continue to do so. EFA has been a solid partner for the city for over 7 years. In fact, we have renewed our MOU with the city for the next 2 years and recently agreed to take on the task of promoting cultural tourism, including calendar of events for the community. We've been successful in fundraising efforts as demonstrated by the purchase of concert grand piano, the first city-owned public art, et cetera, and we have offered cultural programming such as Dia de los Muertos in partnership with the city for many years. EFA was the only entity that held the fundraising events at Pacific View site, and 100% of proceeds plus more was donated to AACEA, so we've been always supportive. Naturally, EFA will support ecology and related education as part of the vision, perhaps in the near future. And good news is, Assembly Member Tasha Borner-Horvath, when I was speaking to her, she stated that she will consider matching the city's funding for the projects up to $3.5 million if we were to apply for the grants, and we're happy to help you with that. In fact, this is a critical time because there are a lot of fundings available through the county grants, community enhancement, neighborhood reinvestment, private grants, San Diego Foundation, Conrad Prebys, CESPRAG Foundation, and et cetera, and national grants through National Endowment for the Arts. And we had included a fab lab or fabrication lab as part of this because we think we need to look forward for the education in terms of future. And I have contacts with MIT, which they can help us out. Thank you.
Thank you for all you have done and all the organization continues to do. It's really valuable, and we're grateful.
Good afternoon, Mayor Blakespear, as well as other council members and everyone here that's attending. I am a member of Encinitas Friends of the Arts as well on the board, as well as a local realtor. I've been in the community over 30 years, Cardiff and Encinitas as a whole. And I just wanted to go ahead and point out that it is a public, as mentioned, document, the ACC vision document. It's got a very thorough table of contents that actually includes the vision and mission, a scope statement, problem statement, as well as even a solution overview. And in the side of time, I'm just going to go ahead and review the solution overview, which is on page 7 of this document. So the solution overview, by activating the current site at Pacific View, we will give a much-loved building new life by returning it as a valuable arts education resource. Activity levels will be similar to when the site was used as a school, Outside activities will be limited to weekends and not on a regular basis. By creating a gathering place to attract more cultural tourism, we will create economic growth for many of our surrounding businesses. We support the data research mapping and dissemination of statistics to show improvement in revenue for Encinitas. By ensuring educational programs that support innovation, the arts add value to a variety of businesses and nonprofits. This happens with collaboration with artists in our area, including many who are known nationally and internationally, who can and are willing to contribute their time and experience. We create employment opportunities for teachers and entrepreneurs who can take advantage of a state-of-the-art facility. And lastly, as far as the solution overview, we will apply for county, state, and national funds to have downtown Encinitas designated as a cultural district, using funds for capital improvements and community enhancement, as well as funds to preserve the site as part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Great American Main Street. I'm really excited with everything that was proposed and discussed by everyone up here on the panel and the council, and I'm hoping this will move forward in a swift manner with the proposed uses. Thank you so much.
Next speaker is Naomi Nussbaum, followed by Deanna Sabak, and then Ralph Bettencourt.
Mayor Blackspear and esteemed council members, my name is Naomi Nussbaum, Executive Director of Synergy Arts Foundation, a local nonprofit arts organization that has supported EFA and the arts commissioners in the city of Encinitas for a long time. I've been fully committed to establishing an arts center since the city's original proposal 7 years ago. Art is the great equalizer. It is inclusive of everyone, discriminates against no one, and builds community. Everyone will be welcome to participate, our residents, our neighbors, short-term and long-term visitors. Just imagine a place where our seniors teach creative skills to our youth, and our youth teach new technologies to our seniors. We envision this art center as a center of innovation through the arts. It will not only fuel the local economy, provide employment, but finally put Encinitas on the map as a cultural arts district. Our primary focus would be, obviously, arts education in all its diversity, with after-school programming as the cornerstone, offering our youth a safe and creative place to grow, explore, gather, and express themselves, and ultimately to empower them to become our future leaders. We plan to include a fabrication laboratory to provide hands-on instruction to connect innovation with creativity, adding the A to STEAM: science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, which is vital to the current and future workforce. We shall have art professionals provide workshops and lectures. We shall use the outdoor space to mount exhibitions and art markets, design and grow a sustainable garden. We would provide affordable studio space for our local artists and offer an open studio tours and exhibitions. We plan to do outreach and provide transportation options to offer everyone, young and old, who wish to participate. Classes offered will be diverse. They will range from 3D printing to ceramics, from animation to fashion design and sewing, from songwriting to puppet making, from music to woodworking, from dance to video and filmmaking, and everything in between, depending on, of course, what we all decide together. The possibilities are limitless. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Dan?
Good afternoon, Mayor Blackspear and council members. I so appreciate us having this discussion. Throughout human history, Deanne Sabeck, local artist, former Arts Council member for 6 years, and on the board of Encinitas Friends of the Arts. Throughout human history, we have learned about our ancestors through their cultural arts. Painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, poetry, theater, music, and many other disciplines. These things define their respective cultures, and we, as the future inhabitants of this amazing planet, get to not only learn about but celebrate those in our past through their creative endeavors. Arts and culture are not only the heart and soul of a society, but literally what we have to leave behind is our footprint as to who we were and what we valued. Creativity is a big word. It is, after all, how all things exist. It is not only art, music, and dance. It is every single idea and technology that has ever come to fruition. When you teach a child to be creative, you are giving the best gift you could give not only to that child, but the future society, as a creative person is the one who breaks the mold and launches that new idea that changes the world. If you want to drive a society forward and spur innovation, you encourage creative ideas, disciplines, and provide the space within which to nourish and enrich them. Encinitas is a precious place with a vibrant community of artists who can lead the way by sharing their talents with youths, adults, and seniors. The residents here have and use wonderful parks for sports, outdoor play. Even our four-legged friends benefit. We have a beautiful library, community center, all important landmarks that the city created and now maintains. The missing link is the lack of space for creative arts and innovation, as it literally drives everything else. Pacific View was purchased by the city all those years ago after hearing loudly from the citizens that that's what they wanted. And that has been reaffirmed with the last survey where almost 80% of the citizens of your city responded they wanted this site to become an arts and cultural center. So I'm very glad you're really taking this to heart. There are a few opportunities where an elected official has the opportunity to make a visionary decision that will positively impact your community for generations to come, to make a huge impact for your community, to take the next leap into the future and leave a legacy, the gem of the city, the cultural center in the Arts District. You have a pot of gold right at your fingertips and the chance to realize this amazing vision. Now is the time to take action on this very special place that was left by its original owners for just such a vision, and Encinitas Friends of the Arts is here to help you do just that. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ralph Bettencourt. He will be followed by John Dewald and then Mike Conway.
Hello, City Council. Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Bettencourt, a 42-year business owner and resident in Encinitas. I'm here today representing the American Legion, which is 700 plus members and 4,000 veterans in our service community. After hearing this, I've thrown out my whole speech. Tony, history, 1932, right after World War I, veterans drug building from Camp Del Mar in Del Mar to our current location at 2nd and F Street, 200 feet from the school. So we've been here pretty much there. We've got a little history, a little culture here too. For 90 years, we have been operating and serving veterans and the community as a whole. We've done it independently. We've done it financially solvently. Where we are at the time that we established, I looked it up, 1934, the population of Encinitas was 1,600 people. The population of the San Diego school last year, I had to extrapolate, it's like a couple thousand. Those numbers are now over 60,000, 180,000. We are busting at the seams. We've raised our own money. We have our own plans with the city right now to expand and redo our structure, parking issues and the same stuff we have. We're solvent. Let us move 200 feet and we can bring you several $1 million. You can also use our site to build up to 5 temporary housing units for transitional housing and homeless veterans. Those in that community say, homeless veterans would prefer to deal with veterans, which is true, because we have them walk into our facility regularly. We had a police officer who was retired military who was kicked out of his house because he fell off the wagon. He walked in, a couple of the guys in this room gave him money, fed him, set him up. He reported back to us 2 weeks later that he was back at home sober and living his life. We do that all the time. Anyhow, we have money, you have a location, we have space. I know this is last minute, and it was a matter of us looking at 8 years, that place sitting there thinking, why aren't they moving? They don't have money, they don't have a plan. Can't we be part of that? That's it, so we're asking that you, in any decision, and I heard looking for partners, I could spend time extrapolating. Now, the last thing I want you to know is I've lived with an artist for 47 years. I love artists. Art is great. And I have to say my wife's probably most famous local piece was the dog on a scooter for Dog Days of Cardiff that they used several years, and she gave permission to use. Anyhow, with that, we are the community. The founders of our community, your parents, your forefathers, they're part of our post. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is John Dewald, to be followed by Mike Conway, and then Noden Lilly.
Hello, I also kind of threw out my speech, but I thought I might talk to a number of the technical points, not so much, saying what kind of art we would have there, but how do we get there, the plan to get there, and the uses and stuff like that. A couple of things. One, cultural arts centers are fairly complicated to do. We studied 15 different art centers, business plans, all kinds of things. I think of them, only 7 of them actually ever got built. So one of the things I would recommend is that you do look at bringing in some professionals to help you with some of that assessment. Second piece is going to be the design piece and bringing in some people that understand art centers, multiple-use art centers. You have issues with sound systems, lighting, flooring, all kinds of stuff that go into that planning. And so I think the early stages of this, I think bringing in some of those kind of people to help us would be very important. I think you can get from our community a lot of what they want to do, but you're going to need to have some people help you assess, choosing which ones. One of the things that we understood from our assessments is that particularly the performing arts have a challenge, and the industrial arts have a challenge because there's not many spaces for them. And you need to look at that. And that's how we looked at, Roy, can you put the use thing up there? As we looked through those uses, we selected those things to allow us to try to get the broadest set of arts capabilities there. We did a few extra things to bring in some other types of uses, but little nuances. Education, institution, private, one of the reasons we chose that one, even though it requires a major use permit, is that the other education one is for education that's prescribed by the state. So in other words, a lot of this art education wouldn't necessarily qualify as educational institution public. So there's lots of little nuances that I think you want to be careful with as you go through this. To be honest with you, I think you'll have difficulty finding enough uses that make this thing worthwhile that aren't going to draw a coastal development permit. So we can try, but I think you'll get to a point where it's going to be very difficult to make that happen that way. The good thing about this site, I know you've talked about parking. We did a lot of parking analyses with lots of different combinations of uses at the same time and so on. And so there's a pretty complicated matrix that we went through that was approved by staff. So I think the parking issue can be resolved, particularly if you're not having those 300-person things. We were trying to shoot for that as like the worst case scenario. And so we did look at how we could design parking to deal with that. And to the point of performance areas, at best you're going to get 100-person venues. But what we've heard is that is actually a nice size for some of the smaller scale things to do. So I think performance arts are something that you can do there, certainly. The landscape and the grounds. There's a lot of grounds there. Landscaping is going to be an important thing to consider, both from a maintenance and cost, but also in terms of the opportunities that it brings to the table. Somebody mentioned gardens and stuff. That's why some of those things are on there. So there's a lot of complexity, and I think we'll be careful as we go through this.
Thank you, John, for all the work you've done on this.
Thank you, John.
Mike Conway, Encinitas. I just want to say that I'm very encouraged by the comments that I've been hearing from the council today. I think it sounds like it's finally going to happen. Public opinion in the city has conducted a community survey that showed that Encinitas citizens want an art center to be located on the Pacific View site. We have all discovered over the past 8 years that establishing that art center is a very complex issue. There is now so much history on the matter that a book could be written. Moving forward, I have 3 main areas of concern. My first concern is the current zoning on the site has proven to be a real problem. The zoning permits certain uses while excluding other uses that would be considered essential for any arts center. The council should direct staff to find an existing or a special zoning designation which would enable a fully functioning arts center to be established. According to city staff, a council-initiated zoning change would have to be finalized no later than June 2022 to be placed on the ballot for the next general election on November 8th, 2022. A zoning change would most certainly be approved by the voters of Encinitas. Secondly, the city has got to step into a leadership role on this project as it did with the community park, library, community center, and countless other projects. Private groups and nonprofits are just not going to be able to deal with the complexity and liability involved with the permitting process. Over the last 8 years, we have learned that there is no one group out there who is going to come riding in on their white horse and provide the money, time, and effort to bring this project to fruition. I would like to commend the efforts of the EACEA, who were able to bring the project before the Planning Commission, but can go no further without city support. The city should obviously take advantage of input from all local groups during the permitting process, and once the doors are finally open, everybody should have an opportunity to participate. In all probability, there could be lawsuits regarding uses on the site that private groups or nonprofit is not going to be able to endure protracted litigation. The city has to take the lead. Funding would be the final issue. The Arts Center has to be made a priority project with funding allocated in the upcoming budget. Some type of monetary commitment would demonstrate the city is seriously pursuing this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Noden Lilly, followed by Felix Tinkoff, and then Jessica Toth.
Hi, hello, member. I'm Lily Noden, the founder of Dragon Night International Street Art Performing Theaters. So I'm going to have Heather talking for me because you don't want to hear my accent. I wrote a letter for you, so she's going to read it for me. Thank you.
Okay, Lily arrived in Encinitas a long time ago with the idea of sharing and teaching new techniques and artistic practices. She's been working with young people on the streets for 27 years, often at the crossroads of their lives where they no longer know in which direction to go, doubting their ability. She's here to remind them and prove to them that anything is possible. By using various aspects of live performing arts, they've discovered talents they could never have imagined possible before. As a result, they regain the confidence necessary to pursue their goal. Many of us have been wanting for 8 years to help and learn about the evolution of the Pacific View with the goal to transform it into an art cultural center. It must be recognized that the commitment of Naomi Woodward, president of Encinitas Friends of the Arts, and the obstinacy of the team, that the inventiveness of many artists who accompany this project, whether permanent or temporary, that by the courage and the know-how of all, we have a solid proposal now. And residents, businesses in charge of the cultural affairs, animators, artists are all longing for that center. We know that your position is difficult, caught in the crossfire. Encinitas, a piece of paradise, is a city in constant evolution. You listen carefully to the needs of your residents, which confirms that you do fantastic work. It's not a question of here of being for or against art and culture. It's now a question of guaranteeing access to culture for every resident. I'm going to skip to the nitty-gritty. Through my research, the youth of Encinitas, between 15 and 25 years old, constitutes more than 20% of the population. I question why we have a senior center, but still not a youth space in our city. During the debates to save Pacific View, the youth showed up strongly and clearly, stated the need to realize the space for them and with them. Have we really heard them? Today, with the Cultural Arts Center project, we can achieve 2 goals with 1 project. What better dream than to have an art cultural center animated by creative people to receive and teach to the youth, the people of our streets. The goal is to promote the autonomy and realize the aspirations of our youth. The time and attention we pay to the children should be at the heart of the socialization and the growth of the younger generations who are, after all, the future of our community. To date, there's no place for our young people to meet, create, express themselves, place between school and home. This will be the place.
Thank you.
A youth center.
We appreciate your letter. We don't mind your accent, too. If you want to read it next time, it's okay.
Oh, trust me, you don't.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Felix Tinkoff. I'm here representing Dr. McPherson, who could not be here, but wishes he could be. He is in Alaska looking at some, hopefully, northern lights. So I'm going to attempt to present his suggestions for the Pacific View site. Dr. McPherson and I have been before the council for the last, actually, I think it's been about 12 years on this site, before it was even purchased. And what Dr. McPherson is hoping to do is to kind of bring together the environmental, economic, and community benefits that this site can actually produce. Getting straight to the point, what he is proposing is this: a streamlined effort to bring arts education to Pacific View rather than performative arts. And I'm glad to hear that that's seemingly the direction that I'm hearing today, at least. His vision begins with the city's approval of the site for paid parking to improve access to Moonlight Beach, to the retail downtown retail corridor, and both of which obviously need additional capacity. This parking revenue will generate funds to improve Pacific View, not directly, but instead to provide the city with resources to lease up the site for this arts education. And what he is proposing initially is that the arts education would be focused on daytime uses for adults and young adults in educating them on a variety of forms of art. These would be for-profit and nonprofit lessees who would be required to perform their own tenant improvements onto the site to enable it to enhance it and to activate that site, removing from the city the burden of the expense of a massive improvement thereon. After improving the site and stabilizing the facility's rents, a second phase of after-school arts programs for the community's children would be incorporated into the leasing program, generating further lease income to support the site. And finally, a third phase of arts enrichment for the community's special needs children would be introduced, generating even more revenue. Dr. McPherson knows this works because he has an even larger facility than Pacific View just up the road in Oceanside, known as Terry, T-E-R-I. He is willing to put forward the resources to put together this plan on his own. If the city is interested, he would hire not only subject matter experts, but also legal expertise and just real estate expertise to ensure that the entitlement issues you're concerned about would not be of a concern. He hopes that you will consider this as a proposal. He believes that it would only take him roughly 4 months to put together a proposal for you all. So I will leave it there, and of course, we'll stand by for any questions. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jessica Toth, followed by Irene DeWattville, and then Danny Salzhandler, and then Russell Levan.
Hi, I'm Jessica Toth. I'm the Executive Director of Solana Center for Environmental Innovation. Thank you for addressing this subject. I'm not here to argue for Solana Center being at the location, but I have to say that I'm a little bit confused as to how the ecology piece has fallen off. the subject here. I'm not sure if ecology is considered a distraction. I see it as complementary to the uses at the site. And I can elucidate some of the things that we've talked about in the past, along the lines of Encinitas being an environmental leader in the region and a real model. I think there's an opportunity at that site to demonstrate sustainable living practices. As I've mentioned to a number of you in the past and to the administration of the city, we can do outside activities to activate the site without permitting right now. There is portable office space, an outdoor classroom. Again, I'm not here just to advocate for Solana Center, but I think we're missing an opportunity if we exclude the ecology piece, which was originally part of the program as it was defined even way back when we were considering purchasing the site. So I welcome if there's an opportunity to have that discussion. If not, I think it's probably time for me to step out of the dialogue. There seems to be a lot of momentum toward this becoming purely an arts center. I don't object to that, but I do think there's a missed opportunity if that's what it becomes exclusively. There's great space and grounds there that could also include ecology elements. So thank you very much.
Irene?
Hello, my name is Irene de Watteville, and I'm trustee of a foundation, and I wrote a letter. I don't know if you read it, but I could repeat a few things about it. My main thing is I talked to the Boys and Girls Club, that is Encinitas, Del Mar, Solana Beach, and they did say they are lacking, they are focusing on sport, they're definitely lacking art for the children, and she even offered to take their van, which takes 8 kids, and would bring them to the site if it became a place. I'm also at the same time really wanting a youth center. As Lily mentioned, yeah, we have a senior center, but where do the kids hang out around 7-Eleven, or they surf or whatever? But at the same time, they could, after school is okay. But what we really want is if we could get 10% or 5% of those kids to really find a passion, that would be wonderful to have them do that. So I found many things, from hunger to, of course, the Community Resource Center and many arts organizations all over San Diego. And one thing that I realize, we always say, oh, North County is not really involved in the arts. Well, we do have the Oceanside Museum, the Cannon Gallery, now ICA, which is the Lux, etc. And I think if we had a dynamic, versatile, wonderful arts organization that would be used not only after school, but during the day, we could say, hey, North County is wonderful, and look at Encinitas put a new little star in our understanding what art does, culturally, economically, whatever. And I would be very happy to support, and I know I work with many organizations who I won't mention, who would be very happy once you have something that is approved by you, the city, and also with a plan. And they would, I guarantee they would help as much. And I would help on the daily stuff. Thank you so much. And I hope you make it happen. Thank you.
Danny? And Danny will be followed by Russell Levan.
I got a stopwatch.
So do we.
Danny Sauls Handler, Cardiff by the Freeway. It was,
We could run our stopwatch while he's running his stopwatch too. Yeah, thank you.
it was, the 101 Artist Colony was designated at one point as the Encinitas Center for the Arts. And we ran it for 10 years, artist money, artist effort. Those days are gone. We still do the Arts Alive banners and the full moon poetry slams. But it was about 20 years ago when Pacific U closed as a school. Peter Norby called me and said, man, the school's out. Let's move the Artist Colony in there. We can do underground parking and we can do great things. And it is hard to believe that that was 20 years ago. Well, 19 years ago. And this community is so ready all the way around. My Rotary Club was having lunch there today, and everybody was leaving. Carolyn Cope says, don't leave. I can't shut the gate by myself. So at one point, Garth and me decided if we can get the gate fixed, we can open up an art center. Now it turns out you got a gate fixed and $9 million. So there's always a hurdle. Everything you said tonight is very positive. I am so glad that you are envisioning the view, because it seems to be that's what you're doing. And the EEACA, is that what I am? We have given it our best shot, and we've done a lot of work behind the scenes that I don't think anybody really even knows about. And it wasn't really me, because my forte really is setting up chairs and sweeping the floor, and my talents are being wasted. And so hopefully we can get that going. The Encinitas Arts, Cultural, and Ecology group, I've been in many situations like these gentlemen back here overseas where you know you won, but you're being told you lost. And I'm glad that y'all do envision the view.
I'll even take my mask off for this. I'm back. Russell Levan, good afternoon. Following Jessica Toth, she said what I came down here to say. Please don't forget the concept of ecology in this project. I'm all in favor of the arts. I understand the need and desire for an art center, so if that's the way we can move forward. But I think that the design, the development of the property has to include ecological as well as artistic balance. We can create a showcase for ecology in the building and the grounds themselves. So even though it's an art center, and yes, I still want to have recycled art projects and all of those types of things, but that's not the ecology aspect I'm talking about. We can show people how to conserve water, how to use solar, how to have passive solar design, which that building was passively solar designed, whether they knew it or not. It's a really nice structure to educate the public while they're doing their artistic endeavors. So we attempted this type of concept at Pawlackie Central School when we developed the plan for what was called the School as a Garden. So they wanted a garden program, and we tried to include the entire campus as a learning opportunity in garden design and sustainability. So there are rain gutters that go down into rain barrels, and we diverted water out of the storm drain so that it would actually feed certain aspects of the campus, saving water and actually preventing a lot of pollution. We put in permeable pavement. Now there's solar. We did a whole bunch of designs in the garden, and I think that's what we could do at Pacific View. But if we just start building an art center and we bring in art experts only
and not include this ecological aspect, I think you're, as Jessica put it, really missing on a phenomenal opportunity. So I think I'll just start repeating myself, so I'll cut it off there. Thank you.
Mayor, that does conclude speakers.
Councilmember Lyons, did you want to speak? Or did you put your name back?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, okay, good, thank you. Based on some of the public comment that I've heard, I'd like to throw out something else for, two things for my colleagues to consider, two things to propose that we look at when we're asking staff to focus on our vision for this property. One is, based on what Russell and Jessica are saying, we will be required to do landscaping on the property. I know that because I'm a landscape architect, so it's not like that would be a requirement. I would like our staff to also look at what the EACEA has done for proposals for the site that would not raise the bar and create a barrier for permitting. So, for instance, I know that the EACEA plans show rainwater harvesting off the roofs, and that's something that Russell was kind of focusing on. I would like to know if that is creating a barrier to our permitting or not, and if it's not, then it would be an amazing example of what we can do with a facility that's very sustainable and resilient. I know we had just passive rainwater harvesting in the plans. That's usually just something that's in a landscape. We had revegetation of the slopes. We're already doing that out there. We have been doing that through Mark Wisniewski and Brad Roth. So there's a lot of things perhaps are already doing. I know there's a donation of citrus trees that were intended to go into the ground and be part of the landscape plan that have been struggling in wood boxes for 2 years. So I think there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm behind the plant materials and the ecology as it moves forward. Perhaps, just like everything else in those plans, there are a few things that kind of notch it up into creating a barrier for permitting. And so perhaps we want to, again, manage our expectations on what we can include in the restoration of the site as we're also considering restoring the building. And I do want to, then my second comment is based on what John Dewald was presenting, and it reminded me to say that as we move forward, we are missing an opportunity if we don't involve John and his board in our dialogue, because they've already put so much work in, and I think we need to make a point of getting them involved in our dialogue as we move forward. I think they add value to how we make decisions about how we restore the property and the land uses on the property. Those are my two comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, I would certainly second Joy's desire to see EACEA remain involved in this process, at least to kind of be able to elucidate regarding what has been proposed previously in the application and make sure that there's an understanding of how they came to that point. And you know, John Dewald is a developer. He has expertise in obtaining entitlements, and so he comes with a significant amount of expertise in this area. So I think that in and of itself is a good reason to keep him involved, because of his knowledge of what has gone before. One of the things that we've been talking about, Roy, is the zoning use matrix, and I'm wondering if you can explain. You know, there's a table of things, right? Activities, and you know, we're trying to, that is a whole that's a certain shape, and we're basically trying to take what we're proposing and fit it into that shape and make it work. What is the process for doing it the other way around, where we define the use and then call it what is the best match, and if it's not in our zoning code matrix, we add it. Does that guarantee a Prop A vote, or is there a way that if there isn't an intensification of use, I mean, there are some uses that are allowed in public, semi-public by right that are quite intense. So it seems to me there might be a process where we could be more exact with our definition instead of calling it a museum.
In order to add a use that is not listed as a permitted use in the matrix, that would trigger a Prop A vote.
Would.
Yes.
Any additional use? Don't we modify that list already, that zoning code matrix?
The current matrix?
Yeah.
We have not.
We have not, okay.
Yeah.
I thought we were doing that as part of our cleanup. We would.
I apologize. I apologize, yes. We are working on, it's part of our omnibus code cleanup. We're working through that, but it's mostly just cleanup. We're not changing the uses or adding any additional uses that would trigger Prop A. But we're just looking at uses, for instance, some of our efforts that we brought forward to the council, allowing like group home, all those types of uses that were part of a separate effort. That's part of the cleanup, is to make sure that the matrix is current and consistent with those efforts. So.
Sounds a little bit like what I was envisioning, but the other thing that I would like to ask is that we get focused on the process of establishing an arts district for our downtown, because I think that this would be the crown of an arts district, a Pacific View site that included, you know, an arts center, cultural arts center. So, are we looking to have a motion tonight, or are we looking to give direction? How do you see this going?
Well, I'd like to make a few comments, and then I have a proposed direction, which I'm happy to state, and you can take credit for it if you want to be the one who makes the motion. Okay. But I just wanted to make sure that you got to do it if you wanted to. Because you are the council member who bought the property. You're the only one who was on that council that bought the property. So I definitely have deference to you when it comes to Pacific View. So I want to thank the public comment, and I think if you were listening closely to what people said, you could hear, in my mind, every public comment. I was thinking, how do we operationalize that within this framework? And among the many things that were mentioned were helping our unsheltered population, the Boys and Girls Club, veterans, environmental commitments, paid parking, a youth center, housing, and underground parking. And you realize all these different things which could or can't be part of this project. I think the ecology piece is really important to all members of the council, the community, and we have our Travis, who is in the back, and I would like to invite him to come up and talk to these two environmentalists about specifically doing some of these things you were talking about, like rainwater harvesting at the senior and community center right now. Because we have an operating community space that could use some improvements in those ways. And I think Travis is very environmentally oriented. And so after this meeting, which will end in about 6 minutes or before that, I'm hopeful that you could have a conversation and think about ways to do those things at our city properties now. But I also think the question of, like, are we having classes on how to be ecologically oriented, or how to do solar panels that were mentioned, rain gutters, passive solar, that those are things that go to the question of private classes, which go to uses, which I think those are all things that we need to have the staff come back to us within a certain framework of a cultural arts center. But to recognize that this property does need to be designed to be the most ecologically friendly possible, and we need to bring in our local experts to help orient it toward that, and not to see that as an afterthought. But I also just want to mention that my grandpa built the Cardiff School, which has now been torn down, but in the 1950s, and the orientation of passive solar was very much considered at when buildings and schools were designed, because there was no air conditioning and heating. And it's not just the sun, but also the wind, because it's so close to the ocean. And does the wind just blow straight in, or does it allow it to go through, like, to kind of go over it? And so the buildings as designed are designed in the best way, and we are not planning to move them. So, the idea of passive solar and wind and climate management, I think, is something that was considered more in the past in some ways than it is now, when there's just a blank sheet of paper and there's a building put on it. So I just want to I want to recognize the importance of what you both said, but I also want to make sure that we stay focused on what it is that is the primary mission, so that we don't end up becoming with mission creep and then not being able to move forward as expeditiously as we want. So I'd like to suggest a potential motion for Councilmember Kranz to make, which would be that we provide a timeline, that we direct staff to provide the council a proposal and a timeline for a cultural arts center. And I say cultural arts center because a number of my colleagues use the word cultural arts center, not just art center, and also a number of members of the public did. So, and that it rely upon the permitted uses and utilize the existing buildings, and that the staff consider and bring back to us potential funding sources, including, I would say any potential funding sources. So there was a reference to Tasha Berner Horvath, our assembly member, and grants there. There's American Rescue Act funding potentially. There's our city general fund. So there are potential private partners that the city staff may know about. So I would just like to say that if the staff could come back with the funding proposal, that would allow us to move forward. So recognizing we don't have unlimited funds, but there are a variety of different places funding could come from. And then to use the EACEA permit as it is valuable to the city. So, and then also the last bullet point was that the staff consider staffing and budgeting. And I think those are questions which several council members mentioned are important, but they also are in some ways secondary, but they're also critically important. We don't want to overextend ourselves and not be able to run this facility, obviously. But so that should be considered. So how do you feel about that motion, Councilmember Kranz?
So moved.
Okay.
So moved. And I would also point out that the operational O&M component, if this is a facility that gets off the ground and is operational, the economic benefits to our city will be significant. So they kind of,
right.
Hand in glove.
Right, good point.
I'm happy to second.
I already did.
Oh. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Okay, and so Roy and Jennifer, and I know our architect he put together our architecture plans. He didn't get to say anything, but if there was any other comments that you wanted us to consider before we vote on this motion, we're happy to hear them. No? Okay. Roy, you feel? City manager? City attorney? Okay. City clerk? Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, well, that was exciting. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for our city council meeting. Or actually, sorry, our water board meeting, which starts at 5.